Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and welcome to tonight's webinar. It's called Engineer, Successfully Build a Bridge to an MBA. So this is a very exciting webinar for me because I know that there are so many community members out there in our Beat the GMAT community who are engineers and are wondering how to present his or her own story as best they can in their applications. And I'm delighted to be co-hosting today's session with Marc Zawel, who is the co-founder and CEO of AcceptU. Marc is going to help outline the ways that engineers can strategize and stand out in the application process for this season. So a little bit about both AcceptU as well as Marc. If you haven't heard of AcceptU, I highly recommend that you go to AcceptU.com right after this session. This is a very special admissions firm developed by former Ivy League admissions officers. AcceptU connects college and MBA applicants with former admissions officers at schools that they're interested in attending, and these counselors provide one-on-one counseling and advice to empower applicants with the inside knowledge, actionable advice, and support needed to gain a competitive advantage in the admissions process. So a really unique service with a very unique talent. Marc Zawel is the co-founder and CEO of AcceptU, as I just mentioned. He's the author of Untangling the Ivy League. He literally wrote the book on gaining admissions to highly selective schools. And he knows something about gaining admissions to highly selective schools himself, just in his personal life. He attended Cornell for his undergraduate and received an MBA from University of North Carolina Kenan-Flagler Business School. And to date, I think even today, he still is involved in conducting alumni interviews for Cornell. He's been doing that since 2004. So someone who has a lot of insider knowledge on what it takes to get into top schools. In a moment, I'm going to hand it off to Marc for him to go through his presentation. But I will say that we will have time for Q&A, some live Q&A at the very end of the session. If you have a question that you'd like to pose to Marc, you can do so by entering your question in the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen on this GoToWebinar platform. Our team is going to be reviewing the questions as they come in, and I'll be coming back into the audio at the end to moderate a live Q&A of your questions to Marc, and we're going to get through as many questions as we can. So, Marc, all that being said, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'll give you the floor.
Great. Thanks, Eric, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. We have about 40 minutes or so for the presentation, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end to answer as many of your questions as we can get to. I'll start by saying first, if you are interested, you can download a copy of this presentation from our site. The URL is up on your screen now, so that you can either follow along as we go through the presentation, or if you'd like, you can download it afterwards as a reference. We also offer a complimentary 30-minute admissions consultation with one of our former MBA admissions officers, and there's a link up on your screen now that you can use to sign up for that session where you can get some feedback on your candidacy. As Eric mentioned, AcceptU is an MBA admissions counseling group comprised entirely of former MBA admissions officers from top 25 programs, and we work with our clients virtually by phone, Skype, and email. And we've worked with literally hundreds of applicants and given them a competitive advantage in this highly competitive process. Eric gave me a great introduction. I just want to also introduce my colleague, Stephen Friedfeld, here at AcceptU. And Stephen has over 10 years of admissions experience, both at Cornell as well as at Princeton. And actually, while he was at Princeton for 6 years, he worked in graduate admissions at the engineering school. So Stephen offered some insight as well into this presentation that I'll be going through tonight that's focused on engineering students. Our counselors, as we've mentioned, are all former MBA admissions officers from these highly selective top 25 programs like Columbia, Cornell, and Stanford. And because they've all worked inside of admissions offices, we feel that they're able to provide applicants with real knowledge and guidance on how to differentiate themselves and improve their chances. So on the agenda for this presentation today is a focus on MBAs and engineers. And we've broken this down into 5 topics, and we'll go through them one by one. We'll start with giving us all a sense of who is an engineer, and more importantly, where are engineers going to business school. We'll talk next about why we feel that an MBA is right for engineers, and we'll talk about how engineers looking to either advance, change, or start a career are a good match for an MBA program. Next, we're going to talk about the positive attributes of engineers, and I'm not talking about your personal attributes. I'm talking about more generally attributes in the admissions process. We'll talk about some of those strengths like your quantitative skills, your critical thinking, your team-oriented approach, and how we can highlight those strengths in your application materials. Next, we're going to talk a bit about how to overcome weaknesses, and engineers are not unique in having certain weaknesses in their applications, and we want to talk about perhaps your, I wouldn't say lack of written and verbal skills, but perhaps your lesser knowledge with those specific skills, perhaps a lower GPA, maybe your GMAT has an uneven distribution. How do you overcome those weaknesses? How do you proactively address those potential weaknesses or those potential red flags in your applications? And then we'll finish up tonight with the best business schools for engineers. We want to talk about the programs that attract engineers and the programs that don't. And there's a benefit to applying to programs that have a lot of engineers, and there's also a benefit to applying to programs that don't have a lot of engineers. And I want to help you understand what the benefits and potentially what some of the downsides are to each of those types of schools. So let's get right into it with who's an engineer and where do engineers go to business school. I want to start with a question, and I know this isn't as interactive as we'd like it to be, but what I want to ask you, what do these business schools have in common? Take a look at them. They, what are their qualities? What are the characteristics? And just give it a second and think, what makes these business schools similar? And what I want to really get and start and drive home at the beginning of this presentation is that as an engineer looking at those business schools, you are among friends. What we did is we went on to MBA Watch, and which is on, as you all know, Beat the GMAT, and we tried to look into which programs attract a lot of engineers. And you'll see that these are the percentages of intended applicants for this coming cycle. And of course, these numbers are all self-reported. They are not comprehensive. They're not verified by the schools. They need to be taken, of course, with a grain of salt. But you'll see that the numbers are ranging from as high as 63% at Carnegie Mellon down into the 30s, or the low 30s at schools like USC. So you're talking about an applicant pool where a third to up to two-thirds of applicants have an undergraduate degree in engineering. When we started to dig more closely into the numbers, not of intended applicants, but of actual enrolling students, what we found is that on average, 30 to 40% of incoming students have engineering or technical backgrounds. And so this range that we're seeing on MBA Watch of intended applicants, it's pretty accurate. You'll see that we're talking between 30 and 40%. Why do engineers love business school? If a third to two-thirds of applicants are engineers, there's got to be something about business school that's a real draw. Let's try to break down what some of these draws are for engineering students. First of all, engineering careers can pigeonhole you. What that means is the longer that you spend as an engineer, the more committed you are to that career, and the less opportunity there is to expand into other careers or build additional responsibilities and skills. Now, of course, the same can be said of other careers as well. You could, in that first line, say marketing careers can pigeonhole you, or operations careers can pigeonhole you. But the reality is that business school is an opportunity for you to expand your horizons. And by expand your horizons, I mean it's an opportunity for you to build skills, to build a network, and to build additional resources that will offer you additional opportunities in achieving your career goals. The second reason why we think that engineers love business school is that your skills and competencies as an engineer are highly transferable to a variety of business-related careers. We said, for example, like in finance or consulting, perhaps some of you listening tonight are in finance and consulting. That wouldn't surprise me. And we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about what areas you are coming from and how you can leverage those experiences depending on where you have chosen to apply your engineering degree. But when it comes to looking at engineers and transitioning into business, whether that function is in finance or consulting or in operations, your skills that you have and the competencies that you've built both in your undergraduate degree as well as in your work experience are transferable, and they are valuable in the business space. So that's a reason why engineers are looking at business programs, and maybe some of you out there are sitting and nodding your head and saying, yeah, that's me. The last reason why we think engineers are applying to business school in these numbers is that the personal qualities of engineers, when you look at those qualities that engineers are most likely to have, like creativity or innovation, they're not just relevant in a business setting, but again, they're highly valuable. So you have engineers that are in careers that they feel are limiting. You have engineers that have skills and competencies that are highly transferable. And you have personal qualities of engineers that are valuable in a business setting. And so you're applying to business school. We now know who's an engineer and where they're going to business school. Now let's talk about why an MBA is right for you, whether you're looking to advance your career, change your career, or start your own career. Let's start with those of you that are looking to advance your career. Now for practicing engineers, whether you're an environmental engineer, whether you're working in a lab setting, you may feel that at this point in your career that it has stagnated. Maybe you are not assuming additional responsibilities. Maybe there hasn't been an opportunity for you to take on a leadership role. Maybe you are becoming restless and bored with the work that you're doing. Maybe you are looking to also expand the foundational skills that you have. You're pretty focused right now in that one career track. If you're looking to advance your career and remain in the engineering industry, an MBA will help you do so for a few reasons. The first is that it's going to round out your skill set. So although you may have had exposure to topics like accounting or finance or management as an undergraduate, this will be your opportunity to really expand on those topics in a grad setting. The other reason why you might be interested in pursuing an MBA is to build on more of those qualitative skill sets. And I'm talking about communication, leadership, management, presentation. Those topics are perhaps not ones that you're having exposure to in your current work environment, and having exposure to them as an MBA student will allow you to draw on them as you return to a career in engineering. The last reason is the building of a professional network. Your professional network right now, if you're working in a lab or you're working as a chemical engineer in the field, is probably quite limited. And what an MBA will do is it'll expand your professional network to those industries and to those functions that you perhaps have not had as much exposure to, or all of the above. So that covers, for those of you that are looking to advance your career. I want to talk next about wanting to change your career. And when you look more generally at applicants to MBA programs, it is largely driven by those that are looking to change their career. And when you break down those that are changing their career, you can think about it in three ways. You can think about a career changer that's staying within an industry but changing their function within that industry, and that would be one category. Another would be the opposite, so changing their function but staying within the industry. And then the last would be one that's looking to change both their industry as well as their function. Whether you're falling into the first, the second, or the third category makes much less different than simply the fact that you are looking to change your career. If you have practical, or you have consulting, or you have academic experience and you are looking to explore a new career track, in order for you to do so, you really do need to build on your skill set, and you need to expand your skill set, both in terms of the quantitative as well as the more qualitative topics that you will cover in an MBA program. And perhaps most importantly for career changers, you need to have access to career services, and you need to be able to leverage the network of the school that you are attending in order to transition your career. Within your existing position, you wouldn't be able to, say, move into a marketing role or move into a general management rotational program unless you were able to build your skill set, build your leadership, and then also have access to the career services resources that these full-time MBA programs will do for you. Where can you go if you're looking to change your career? Wall Street. You can also look at operations or supply chain management, or you can do something completely different. You could go into real estate. You could go into general management. You can go into sales. The opportunities are limitless. Let me talk finally about those of you that are looking to start your own career. And in our practice here at AcceptU, we've seen an increasing number of clients that are interested in entrepreneurship, whether it's starting their own company or going to work for a startup. There is a big draw in terms of those that are looking to go into entrepreneurship. It's about controlling your destiny. It's about having an impact and a real tangible impact in smaller organizations. Technology startups, whether they're in New York or here in Boston or out in San Francisco, they need employees that understand both the technical as well as the business sides of the equation. You have the technical competency already, and so if you can build off of that technical competency and show some business mastery as well, there are a variety of roles that can be an option to you, whether you're looking in business development or product development or project management. Those were just a few. Now, there are pluses and minuses of going the entrepreneurial route, at least from a business school admissions perspective. I mean, of course, more generally, from a career perspective, I would say that there are also pluses and minuses. But let's just think about it purely from an admissions standpoint. The plus side is that as an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, there are far fewer applicants that are indicating an interest in entrepreneurship. There are far more applicants indicating an interest in operations or consulting or some of those, or finance, those other areas that you might be thinking to transition into. And as you know, and we'll talk a little bit more about later in this presentation, standing out and being different is a good thing when it comes to applying to business school. The challenge is that as an entrepreneur applicant, you're going to raise some eyebrows as well in the admissions process. Admissions officers are looking for applicants that have realistic expectations about the career that they will be pursuing upon graduation. And we've actually started hearing about business school admissions offices that are bringing in representatives from career services to evaluate applicants and see, given their background and given their experience and given what the programs can offer, whether their career goals as outlined are attainable and realistic. Now, the problem with entrepreneurship is that there generally is not the type of support on campus as there is for more traditional career tracks. And so your application will raise a red flag because there's going to be concerns about your employability, and you need to be proactive and address those types of red flags so that you can mitigate any potential issues that are raised with your interest in entrepreneurship, whether it's starting your own company or going to work for a startup. So we've now covered who's an engineer, where do engineers go to business school. We've also talked about why an MBA is right for engineers, whether you're advancing, changing, or starting your own career. I want to talk now about the positive attributes of engineers. Again, this is just purely from an admission standpoint. I'm not talking about your personality or otherwise, but I want you to know how your qualifications and how your background is being looked at by these admissions officers. Let's start with your quantitative skills. So these strengths that you have, these three strengths, are certainly ones that you are going to want to play up in your application materials. These are the qualities and characteristics that admissions officers like in engineering applicants. So your quantitative skills, your critical thinking, what is likely a lot of involvement in group and team projects, you need to make sure that you are emphasizing these qualities in your application materials. By application materials, I mean in particular your resume, your essays, and the interviews. But you also need to be careful. You don't want to play up your quantitative skills too much or your critical thinking skills too much. You need to show that there's some diversity to your experience, that although you have very strong quantitative skills and although you have very strong critical thinking skills, you also have these other skills that are complementary and that will be beneficial as you look to pursue an MBA. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that you're applying for an MBA, not a master's in engineering. All of your application materials need to be tied into business. That's what you are focusing on. And I know it may sound obvious, but if you start to overplay the qualities as an engineer that you feel you have are the strongest, you might have admissions officers saying, well, why is this applicant looking at business school? Shouldn't this applicant be looking at pursuing an MEng or a master's in engineering elsewhere? So make sure that you're, in playing up these strengths, you are also focusing on their applicability to business and business school. Tie those experiences into your ability to perform well in business school. Think about how if you do possess these qualities and these qualities are a strength, what will that enable you to do when you are in these full-time MBA programs? And then last, but this is probably the most important, excuse me, is you need to be very clear in articulating your short-term and your long-term career goals. You want to be as clear and as focused as you can be. And what you need to do is show admissions officers how your past experience, your work experience, as well as your undergraduate education has led you to believe that this career goal is the next step for you. And your career goal can fall into one of those three categories that we talked about earlier. It can be accelerating your career, it can be changing your career, it can be starting your own career. But what you need to do is show admissions officers how your work experience and how your undergraduate education has led you to a point where you have a much clearer sense now of what your short-term and your long-term career goals are. What you then need to do is show how business school is literally the bridge that's going to help you jump over that gap between where you are today and where you want to go tomorrow. So there's really the focus of your application and of your story needs to be on your past and your future and how business school is the bridge that's going to help you get there. Within specifically your quantitative skills, you as an engineer have probably, I wouldn't even say probably, but you have taken physics or advanced math classes or computer science courses. tie this coursework into your business school coursework. Show them how having taken advanced coursework, say in math or physics, will lend itself to in your ability to perform well in, say, finance or statistics or economics. Also tie it into your career interests. Your application is not just an application that will demonstrate to admissions officers that you are qualified to enroll at these schools, but that ultimately you will be able to achieve your goals if given an opportunity to attend. So you want to tie that coursework into your business school coursework, but you also want to tie it into your career interests. And if you can tie a career interest into something that you've perhaps studied as an undergraduate, then you start to see a progression in terms of why you are interested in what you say you are interested in. You also want to talk about your professional accomplishments. Don't get too bogged down in talking about what you studied as an undergrad. Your undergrad might have been 2 years ago, it might have been 5 years ago, it might have been 8 years ago. Either way, it's a thing of the past, and admissions officers are looking at more recent and relevant data points to help them understand your skill set. So talk about applying some of these skills in a professional setting. Think about the application of math and science. What are you doing? You're doing complex problem solving. You want to show some intellectual curiosity. Show how you're being innovative. Show how you're being creative. Show how you are using your experience as an engineer to make strategic decisions. Show that you can analyze and interpret large amounts of data. These types of skills are important in terms of your future careers. It's also important in terms of being successful in business school. And these types of qualities are certainly ones that admissions officers at top programs are looking to identify in applicants. The next skill or competency that I want to talk about in terms of emphasis in your applications is critical thinking. Think for a second about the way in which you have been taught as an engineer to approach problems, identifying and then fully defining a problem, analyzing a problem, and then solving a problem. And then think for another minute here about what's applicable here to business school and more generally business. Identifying and fully defining a problem, analyzing a problem, and solving a problem. This methodology that you have been taught as an engineer is certainly applicable to the problems that you will face in business school, and it'll certainly be relevant to the career that you assume when you graduate. Whether you're going into a completely different career, whether you're looking to accelerate your career in engineering or start your own career. I think at the heart of this and at the heart of critical thinking is the idea that you are very skilled at taking and gaining key takeaways from large amounts and complex amounts of data. And then let's think about how this might be specifically applicable to business school. And when you think about case studies, whether you're looking at case-driven programs like at Darden or you're looking more generally just at business schools in the top 20 or top 25, are relying heavily on cases. And case studies are really a means of giving MBA students large amounts of data, some of which is relevant and some of which is not relevant, and forcing MBA students to really distill what is important, what is not important, what can inform me to help me make a decision about how to solve a complex problem, and how can I rely on that data to strategically implement a solution to that problem. So distilling data, analyzing data is critical in terms of the teaching in business schools, and it's also critical when you think more generally about what you'll be doing when you graduate from business school. Again, whether you're looking to go into operations, finance, marketing, sales, real estate, you name the career track that you're interested in, and I can show you the way in which this approach to problem solving will be applicable. So think about this as a means of showing your critical thinking skills and emphasize those in your applications. The last skill and competency I want to talk about in terms of emphasis is on group and team projects. And as an undergraduate, you, I'm sure, had experience working in teams. Maybe they were for study groups, maybe they were for problem sets. Maybe you think that all undergraduates work in study groups and work in teams, but it's actually not the case. Students that are in the humanities, like in history or English or anthropology or psychology, actually rarely work in teams. Most of their coursework is independent. Now let's think about and talk a little bit about your current career. As an engineer, it's likely that your job is driven by team and group projects and goals. And so you have experience both as an undergraduate as well as in your current work experience working with teams and working with groups. And actually with business school, group work is critical. It's not unusual for MBA classes to weight group work a quarter of your grade up to 50% of your final grade weighted on specifically group work as opposed to independent work that you're completing alone. Business schools are trying to relate what you are learning in the classroom to the real world. And the reality is that successful corporate workplaces are about teams, and they're about common goals, and there's less emphasis that's placed on individuals. So business schools are trying to be relevant in the curriculum and in their teaching methods, and so that's why so much emphasis is placed on the group and the team work. And you have the experience both in an academic as well as in a professional setting. Play that up. So now we've talked about who's an engineer, why is an MBA right for an engineer, what are the positive attributes of engineers. Now let's talk about some potential weaknesses as an engineer. I want to highlight 3 in particular, and these are potential weaknesses. I know that there are some of you out there that may not have any of these, and there might be some of you that have all these and more. But I want to talk about what we feel and what our team of former MBA admissions officers here at AcceptU are the most or the most frequent weaknesses that we saw in engineer applicants. The first and the one that's probably the most obvious is the communication and the written skills. The second is actually a lower GPA, which may come as a surprise to some of you. And then the last is the uneven distribution of GMAT scores. Some of these are not unusual, meaning there might be some of these that most of you have in your applications, and they don't really require explanation because admissions officers looking at your background will expect you to have these weaknesses. But others of these should be proactively addressed, and it ties more generally into owning your narrative and owning your story in the application process. And this is advice not just for these 3 weaknesses, but this is more generally for weaknesses that you identify in your application. If you don't own that story and you don't tell the narrative the way that you want to, admissions officers will make their own assumptions and they'll draw conclusions about you. If you have a low GPA and it's because you went through a life-threatening illness in college and you don't explain to admissions officers in an optional essay the situation, they'll never know. And all they'll see is performance in your transcript, and they'll take away what they want to take away. Now, there's also a balance between talking about too much. So you need to be careful in terms of utilizing the optional essay. But let's talk first about communication and the written skills. So there's an assumption that as an engineer, you have weak communication skills. And this is not trying to stereotype, but I'm just trying to be honest and truthful with you all about the potential red flags that will come up in your applications. Whether those communication skills are oral skills, whether they're written skills, you need to be aware that as an engineer, this potentially will raise a red flag in your application. What can you do as an applicant to counteract this potential red flag. The first is to have super strong essays. Show admissions officers that you do have strong written skills. Utilize the interview as a means of demonstrating that you have very strong oral skills. You can prove to admissions officers in other ways that you do not have this type of weakness in your application. Now, when it comes to your essays, you do have to be careful because, and we'll talk about this on the next slide when we discuss GMAT, I'm sorry, in a few slides when we talk about GMAT distribution, but if you have a particularly low, say, verbal score, and then you have super strong essays, that might also raise its own red flag about what type of assistance or guidance you had in writing your essays. So make sure that your essays are comparable to your writing abilities and not beyond. But if you do have strong writing skills and you do have strong oral communication skills, you should really knock out the essays and the interviews, and it'll be a means for you to address what they might see as a potentially weak communication skill set. Of course, the other way for you to address this is by having as high of a GMAT verbal score as possible. I know that the GMAT score might not be representative of your true communication abilities, but this is a proxy that's used by admissions officers to get a better sense of what your communication skill set is. So your quantitative skills in terms of the GMAT should lend itself more heavily to those sections that are math-driven. Spend time focusing on the other components to the GMAT so that you can demonstrate that you also have strong communication skills. The last tip that I have is about tying in your personal interest into your application materials. Admissions officers have their own preconceived notions and stereotypes of who engineers are, and what you want to do is try to counteract this as much as possible. If the stereotype of engineers is unsociable or those that don't have strong communication skills, then try to demonstrate that you're not like that in your application. Try to tie in personal interests. What do you do outside of your career? What do you enjoy to do? What are your hobbies? Become someone more real and likable that they can relate to. Admissions officers are not generally former engineers, so show them that you are someone that you would be, or I guess another way of saying it is, show them that you're someone that they would want to have on their campus. These admissions officers work at the business schools. They want to admit students that they want to interact with every day in the halls and down in the cafeteria. So try to tie in some of your personal interests so that you can become someone that is perhaps more likable and more real and someone that they can relate to and overcome those stereotypes that they have about your communication skills. Now let's talk a little bit about your potentially lower GPA. As an engineer, you may have a lower GPA than that of the average applicant or the average admitted student. You might think that this is going to raise a red flag. Let's talk a little bit about what you can do to counteract this, and the short answer is nothing. Your GPA is what it is, and it's not going to change. But that's actually okay. Because admissions officers do not just consider your GPA. And it's really easy, and we work with clients who initially come to us and say, my GPA is not where it is for the average applicant or for the average admitted student. And we say, well, you need to put this all into perspective. Your GPA is just one data point, but admissions officers are going to look at how rigorous of a college or university did you attend? What did you major in? Did you major in engineering or acting or English or biology? And how rigorous was that particular program at that particular university? And then they're going to look specifically at your coursework. Did you take all introductory classes as a senior or did you take the most challenging courses in your final year of college? That is going to in turn weight your GPA in a different way. And so you might look at your GPA purely as a number, but when you start to look at perhaps the rigor of the program that you were in or the rigor of the coursework that you undertook, your GPA will be, at least from an admission standpoint, that will be taken into consideration. And admissions officers in turn should be more forgiving of a lower GPA. Also keep in mind that perceived weaknesses in certain parts of your application can be compensated for by strengths. You have probably heard that admissions at top MBA programs is holistic. They look at your entire package. If you have deficiencies in certain parts of your application, we're talking now about your GPA. In a minute we're going to talk about GMAT. But if there are other parts of your application that you feel are weaknesses, whether it's your number of years of work experience, whether it's the fact that you've had a lot of volatility in your career where you've never held a job for more than, say, 6 months, recognize that strengths in other parts of your application can compensate for those potential deficiencies. And then finally, just remember with your GPA as well as with your GMAT, it's really only one piece of your application. If you pass a hurdle in the admissions process with your GPA or with your GMAT, that's fine. You're now qualified to attend that school, but that does not mean you're going to be admitted. And the difference between being qualified and being admitted is that being admitted means that you've been able to take advantage of the more qualitative pieces of the application process. Being qualified means that you have the GPA and you have the GMAT. Being admitted means that you have the essays, you have an interview, you have interesting work experience, you have focused career goals, you have a resume that's representative of your accomplishments. Those are the students that are admitted, not the students that are necessarily just qualified to attend. The last piece that I want to discuss in terms of qualities and weaknesses that may come across as a weakness is that your GMAT score may be uneven between the quant and the verbal and writing sections, and you perhaps think that this could be a red flag. What can you do to counteract this? Well, first know that admissions officers expect this unevenness in your score. If you're balanced and have a strong verbal or writing score, all the more power to you. That's great. You can, and you've been able to demonstrate that. I think that makes for an even more compelling quantitative data point that admissions officers can look at. Now, if your verbal and writing section is on the lower side, though, and you are an international applicant, demonstrate your competency in other parts of your application, whether it's on the TOEFL or the essays. Show them that your writing abilities and your verbal competency is not reflective or representative of your GMAT score. Now, if you're a domestic applicant, as I just mentioned for the international applicants, play up your verbal and writing skills in other parts of your application. Try to think about your essays, your resume, your interview, all those pieces that we talked about earlier. You want to make those as strong as possible, but also representative of what your abilities are. And then remember, as with your GPA, which it may have been on the lower side, perceived weaknesses in your application can be compensated for by strengths in others. Your GMAT score is only one piece of your application, and your application is going to be reviewed holistically. Don't get strung up on the unevenness of your score. And if you think that you have a deficiency in one part of your application, focus on the other parts of the application. And try to play up strengths in those parts so that it will be balanced and outweighed by this potential weakness that admissions officers identify in your application. So we've gone through now 4 out of the 5 topics, and we're on to the last topic, and then we'll wrap up and take your questions. Let's talk a little bit about the best business schools for engineers, and I want to talk specifically about programs that attract engineers and programs that don't. Should you apply to business schools that have a lot of engineer applicants or those that don't? And it's an interesting question, because if the school has a lot of engineer applicants, what does that mean? Does that mean that the school has good programs for those that are coming from an engineering background? Does that mean that the school is popular among engineers for another reason? Are engineers applying to these business schools because they see a lot of engineers at the business school and it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle? Regardless of the reason behind it, if business schools have a lot of engineer applicants and you are also an engineer applicant, you are following the crowd. That's not necessarily a good thing. If business schools don't have a lot of engineer applicants, then maybe you're standing out as an engineer applicant. Admission strategy, and we talk a lot about this with our clients, is about identifying schools that have the right programs for you. This is the absolute most important factor in identifying schools to apply to. If you are targeting schools as an engineer that have a lot of engineers, but that program is right for you given what your career goals are, I would never discourage you from applying to that school because of an inability to stand out. If the program is right for you, it doesn't matter how many others like you are applying, you should apply. If you're applying, though, for different reasons, if you're applying because you see a lot of engineers at that school, or you're applying because you think that that's a top school and it'll maybe help you accomplish what you want to accomplish, or it has the name recognition and you're looking at other factors, that's not a good way for you to be building a list of schools to apply to. You want to be thinking about schools that have the right programs for you. And then you secondarily want to be thinking about those that might be underserved by applicants like you. Find the schools that have the right programs, and then try to find the schools that don't have a lot of engineers. Think about your undergraduate degree. Think about your work experience. Think about your ethnic or geographic diversity. Think about your future career interests. Are there different pieces that you can bring to the table that will help you stand out in the admissions process? A couple last things that I want to talk about. Admissions officers don't admit well-rounded applicants. This comes up quite frequently with our clients. They say, well, I don't have any community service, or I don't have this, or I didn't play athletics in college. The amount of concern over not being well-rounded can be overwhelming, but the reality is that admissions officers don't admit well-rounded applicants. Admissions officers admit applicants that are focused and that have a career goal and that have a specific background. Admissions officers build well-rounded classes. They look at the applicant pool and then they say, we have all these focused applicants. Who's going to fill what role? And that ties into one of the last points I want to discuss is, who are you? And what niche or role as a former engineer will you fill in this business school? What makes you different? Look at some of those potential ways that you can stand out, whether it's through your undergraduate degree, your work experience, your ethnic or geographic diversity, what you intend on doing after you graduate from business school. Build a story around it. Be compelling, be likable, and if you're able to do that, you can be admitted to these highly selective programs. So to wrap up, I just want to go through what we learned because it was a lot to take in. But we talked about who's an engineer, where they're going to business school. We talked about why MBAs are right for engineers. We also talked about advancing or changing or starting your own career. We talked about playing up some of the positive attributes that you have, whether it's the quantitative skills, the critical thinking, this team-oriented or group approach. We talked about addressing potential weaknesses, whether they're written or verbal skills, a lower GPA, an uneven GMAT distribution. And then we talked a little bit about strategy when it comes to building lists of schools that you should be targeting. So that covers the presentation. And I know that we have some time for questions, so I'll let Eric moderate those now.
Thank you so much, Mark. For those of you who might have joined us a little bit late, we've been listening to Marc Zawel, who is the co-founder and CEO of AcceptU, discuss his insights and strategies for engineers who are trying to get placed into business school. And at this point, we have a couple minutes left in the session to take some of your questions live. So if you have a question, you can post that in the chat area on the right-hand side of your screen, and our team is going to review the questions coming in, and we'll pose them to Marc. So why don't we get right into our first question from Tim. Tim is asking, is it true that among engineers, computer science engineers, or is it true that among engineers that computer science engineers are chosen more often over other branches, say mechanical engineering or electrical engineering branches at the top business schools?
I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the case. I think that admissions officers at top business schools are looking to build, most importantly, as I just talked about, well-rounded classes. And so your background and the specific area that you concentrated in as an undergraduate is important, but only to the extent that you are going to fill a specific role within that class. Computer science might be overrepresented or might be underrepresented. And it's also about being able to tell that story in a really compelling way. And we spent a lot of time through this presentation talking about how to tell that sort of compelling story. Talk about your past experience, talk about your undergraduate as well as your current work experience, show admissions officers where you want to go and how business school is the bridge to get you there. So to answer your question, I don't think it's necessarily the case, but you have to be thinking about the role that you're going to fill. You have to be thinking about overrepresented versus underrepresented majors, and you have to think about building an application that's going to help you stand out from other engineers.
Marc, I see a question here from Nikhil, and Nikhil wants to know, based on your comment about the red flags raised for aspiring entrepreneurs, do you know if admissions committees today want an engineer to have some prior startup or entrepreneurship experience before accepting entrepreneurship as the applicant's career goal?
Well, I've actually gotten that question quite a few times from clients as well as from others that I've spoken with. Now, it can go two ways. The first is that if you do have startup experience, that's a very strong indicator that you have done your due diligence, you know why you are looking to earn an MBA, and you know where you hope to go after business school. So if you have that type of experience, that can be very powerful. But just because you don't have that experience doesn't necessarily mean you can't go in that direction. We work with students, say, that are interested in transitioning from finance into marketing. Well, if you have a background in finance and you've never done anything marketing related, how can you make a case to admissions officers that you should be admitted into that program? It's the same challenge. And what you can do is, if you don't have the specific experience that you can draw on, whether it's entrepreneurial, then think about what are the skills and attributes that successful entrepreneurs have. Think about that, and then try to boil down your experience and identify the ways that you've been able to build those types of skills or build those types of qualities. Maybe not in a direct entrepreneurial way, but maybe in your current position there have been ways that you have been entrepreneurial. And if you can highlight those, it'll serve you just as strongly as if you had the actual entrepreneurial experience or the startup experience to begin with.
Great. I see an interesting question coming in from Caesar. The question is, what do you think is the big difference between the MBA program, the traditional MBA, and some of the new hybrid MBA and Masters of Engineering programs, for example, the MMM degree from Kellogg or the LGO degree from MIT?
I think it's about thinking about what you are looking to get out of the degree. If you're looking to accelerate your career, those types of alternative degrees might be what is going to help you get there. If you're looking to change your career, an MBA I still think is a better degree in that you have this much more immersive experience, you have access to this much larger professional network as well as the career services that are on campus. So think about these various degrees, whether it's an MBA or a master's in another engineering-related field, but tie it all back into what your ultimate goal is. And if you're looking to accelerate your career, you certainly should take into consideration some of those master's degrees in engineering. If you're looking to change your career, or if you're looking to start your own career as an entrepreneur, I still think that an MBA is a better degree for you to consider.
Okay, well, I think we have time for just one more question, Marc. And let's go with Kedar's question. And Kedar, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's a resume question. So Kedar is saying, it said that you should have on your resume, you should have a tone on your resume that's more oriented towards business speak and avoid technical details. But how do you portray or how do you relate complex technical solutions that are implemented in your workplace if you don't completely know its business impact? For example, you can't quantify the dollars saved or increase or percent increase in process efficiency and so forth. So your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question, and we spend a lot of time working with our clients specifically on their resumes. And I'll just say before I answer that specific question, it's smart that you're thinking about making your resume more accomplishment-driven. So many resumes today are descriptive. They're talking about the responsibilities that an applicant had, and while you certainly need to talk about what your responsibilities were, admissions officers are much more interested in what you have been able to accomplish. So now to get to the specifics and the heart of your question, admissions officers are not engineers. Well, some of them may be, but the vast majority of them are not. And what that means is that you need to take your resume, which may be highly technical in nature, and really dumb it down to the point where someone who has zero understanding of engineering or has zero understanding of a more technical role within a company can understand your accomplishments. And if you can highlight your accomplishments and make your resume more accomplishment-driven, and then take your accomplishments and try to explain them in a way that they make sense to someone who has no understanding of engineering roles and responsibilities. And then finally, if you can't quantify your accomplishments, then at least make them somewhat qualitative in what you were able to achieve internally. You might not be able to tie it into a dollar amount. You may not be able to tie it into a decreased number of hours in terms of increased efficiencies or operational efficiencies, but maybe you're able to highlight some of the more qualitative pieces of that accomplishment. Maybe you were able to lead a team. Maybe you were able to have some acknowledgement from your manager or from a superior. Talk about the presentations or perhaps the other communication skills that you were able to build through that engagement. So that's really the approach that I take, is make your resume very accomplishment driven. Dumb down your resume so that someone who has no understanding of engineering can understand your accomplishments, and then as much as possible make your accomplishments quantifiable, and in the areas in which you cannot make them quantifiable, make them qualitatively driven accomplishments, whether it has to do with your leading, your management, your teamwork, your communication skills.
All right, and with that, I think, Mark, we're going to have to close off today's session. So again, we've been listening to Marc Zawel, who is the co-founder and CEO of AcceptU, go through this presentation called Engineer, Successfully Build a Bridge to an MBA. We heard a great and very thorough presentation of strategies, and Mark also spent some time at the end to answer your questions live. So Mark, a huge thank you for spending your evening with us to share these insights.
Thank you all for joining.
Great. Well, I just want to close by mentioning a couple things. The first is that the good folks at the AcceptU team are open to scheduling a complimentary admissions assessment with a former MBA admissions officer, so you can get some real insider advice. You can learn about that opportunity by going to learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. Additionally, if you are interested in getting a copy of this presentation, the AcceptU team is putting this up for free download. You can go to learnmore.acceptu.com/engineer. And if I spoke too fast or you didn't have a pen at hand to write all that stuff down, no worries. We're going to include all this information in a follow-up email that you'll receive if you RSVP'd for today's event. So look out for that email follow-up not too long from now. So again, a huge thank you to Mark and the AcceptU team, and a big thank you to our Beat the GMAT community who came out tonight to learn about some of these strategies as an engineering applicant. And we all wish you the best of luck in your admissions process this year. So all the best, and we'll talk soon.